Greetings, colleagues. Thank you for taking the time to view this webinar, and welcome to Effective Planning, Indicator Analysis using Bloom's Taxonomy. We realize that time is valuable, and for teachers, often scarce. We appreciate you taking the time to view this short webinar for your own professional development. It's designed to assist teachers with understanding the first steps of unit planning, from developing a rich understanding of the meaning of outcomes to developing the big ideas that provide the focus to keep you moving in the right direction. Of course, the first step when planning a unit is to select the outcomes of focus. But once these are decided on, where do we go from there? Well, to fully understand the outcomes, we must take a good look at its corresponding indicators. According to the Saskatchewan Ministry of Education, the outcomes define what a student is expected to know and be able to do at the end of the grade or secondary level course. And the indicators are, in fact, necessary to fully understand the breadth and depth of the outcome. Based on this, we clearly need to have a rich understanding of the indicators to fully grasp the intentions behind each of the outcomes that we teach. When learning about unpacking outcomes, many of us will recall circling and underlining different parts of the outcome and moving forward from there. When learning about unpacking outcomes, many of us will recall circling and underlining different parts of the outcome and moving forward from there, either by drawing a tree-like flowchart, a graphic organizer that deals with the words or and other common practices of figuring out what it is that the outcome is really asking us to do with our students. Somewhere, lost in the translation, are the meanings behind the circling and underlining process and how valuable that can truly be. The nouns within the outcomes and indicators answer the question, what is being learned? For example, key historical events. The verbs within the outcomes and indicators answer the question, what type of thinking is required? For example, analyzing. This is a critical distinction when backwards planning, starting with the end in mind. Through exploring the indicators from this lens, we're gaining a much better understanding of what it is that our students need to learn, as well as how they might demonstrate their learning in a deep and meaningful way. So let's have a look at a specific outcome from Social Studies 9. Outcome DR 9.2 says, synthesize the significance of key historical events in societies studied. This outcome happens to have a total of 3 indicators. While we know that the indicators do not serve as a checklist for teachers to move through, and that not every indicator needs to be explicitly covered, we nevertheless explore every indicator during this phase of analysis. As a side note as well, teachers may develop their own indicators that are responsive to their students' interests, lives, and prior learning. But these teacher-developed indicators must maintain the intent of the outcome, which can only be truly understood after a thorough examination of the existing outcome and indicators is complete. So now we will follow the process of circling verbs which describe what type of thinking is required, and underline the nouns which describe what is being learned. Next, we want to look at Bloom's revised taxonomy to see what level of thinking that the different indicators are classified into. Bloom's taxonomy is simply a classification system of the levels of learning through various domains, from basic recall to complex and multifaceted thinking. Information and verb lists can easily be found by doing an online search. Now let's return to our last slide and have a look at the verbs and the indicators to see if we can classify them with these levels of thinking in mind. Indicator A has the verb represent. In looking through the verb list found online and thinking about what a representation might look like in our class, we've decided that for our purposes, represent would fall under the apply heading. Indicator B has the verb relate. In looking through the verb list found online and thinking about what relating might look like in our class, we have decided that for our purposes, relate would fall under the analyze heading. Indicator C has the verb judge. In looking through the verb list found online and thinking about what judge might look like in our class, we have decided that for our purposes, judge would fall under the evaluate heading. Now that we have a greater sense of what levels of thinking we're dealing with for each indicator within this outcome, we can set our targets for learning. Just like going on a trip to a far-off country, if you don't know where you're going, how will you ever really know if you get there? When making the trip to somewhere distant, you normally have an itinerary that says where you're starting from and when, how you will be traveling, what accommodations you may need to support your travel, when you will make pit stops along the way, and what it will look like, sound like, and feel like upon your arrival. You're probably not going to plan a trip to Ireland or Australia and not pack anything, not buy tickets, and not book a hotel room. You'll likely learn a bit about language and customs, see what kinds of clothes you might need for the weather, and check if you need electrical adapters and more. By setting your instructional targets, you'll define exactly what your students will be expected to know, understand, and do. This is critical to backwards planning, beginning with the outcomes. And now that we've analyzed each indicator by leveling them with Bloom's taxonomy, we will need to put them into an instructional sequence. The following is the summary of how to set instructional targets. As expected, the outcome is found at the very center of the target that we want our students to hit. Moving outwards from there are the indicators that we select and will guide us in determining what will be used as a demonstration that our students have achieved the learning goal. The next portion of the target is for the specific criteria that we're looking for in relation to the indicators. Finally, the outside section of the target is for assessment tasks that will showcase the students' learning. This is also a good place to mention that in the model of triangulation, the term task is not indicative of a product and may be observations and conversations, which are necessary and just as valuable as a product, as an indication of the depth of learning that is and has taken place. Now let's look at the process in more detail. When we begin with the outcome as the center of our instructional target, we are clearly defining what it is that drives instruction in our classrooms. Next, we select the indicators that we feel will best support our particular group of students to achievement of the outcome. In this case, we have only 3 indicators, and while we have the option of creating either more or removing some and creating different ones, we feel satisfied in this case that the specific indicators will provide the necessary direction at this time. We recognize that next year, a different group of students will mean that we will need to look at this again and may need to make changes based on their readiness, needs, and interest. The next ring of the target is for the specific criteria that directly relates to the indicators. At this point, it's helpful to insert lines that help to break the target into sections and keep the different areas separated from each other. The last step is to add the assessment tasks that students will perform to the outside of the target. This provides enough space to add extra tasks to allow for student choice in what to do, or we can embed student choice into the specific tasks themselves. Opportunities for observations, conversations, and products are all accounted for within this space. We've seen how to investigate the meaning behind outcomes through developing a deep understanding of indicators, as well as how to set appropriate instructional goals. Next, we look at big ideas and questions for deeper understanding. As mentioned earlier, outcomes define what a student is expected to know and to be able to do at the end of the grade or secondary level course. Many times, when unpacking outcomes, we forget to identify these pieces, which tie directly to the instructional targets that we just looked at. They help to define specifically what basic knowledge a student must obtain, what skills that a student must perform, and what deeper understandings that a student must consider. From this information, we're able to easily identify the big ideas, or the overarching key understandings, that stem from the outcome or outcomes of the unit we're planning. In stage 1, we identify the outcome, or more likely, multiple outcomes, that are addressed within the unit that we are planning. To gain the necessary knowledge of these identified outcomes, we analyze the indicators and do an instructional target for each one. The instructional target, as shown before, is for outcome DR 9.2. There are still 2 more outcomes to investigate for planning this unit of study, DR 9.4 and RW 9.3. With the instructional targets set, it now becomes a very simple task to identify what students need to know, to do, and to understand. For stage 2, we find that it becomes almost second nature to identify one overarching idea that is at the heart of each outcome. According to the Saskatchewan Ministry of Education, these are not so vast that they are a vague phrase covering lots of content, nor are they just a basic idea. Rather, they are at the core of the subject being studied. They need to be uncovered, and we have to dig deep until we get to that core. So essentially, the big ideas are the driving force that energizes our study within the content area. In this example, there were 3 outcomes for the unit of study, and therefore we identified 3 big ideas that guide the deep understandings within the various outcomes. Big ideas evoke the questions for deeper understanding. These questions are important in developing a deep understanding of the discipline or unit of study within the discipline. They do not have obvious answers, and they foster higher order thinking. They invite genuine inquiry. Developing these questions takes deep thinking on our part, and it is a skill that becomes more straightforward and less demanding as we practice it. Putting it all together then. Planning a unit in this manner takes the guesswork out of planning and deepens our own understanding of the outcomes in a very real and applicable way. To review, the 3 stages of developing a plan are as follows. Identifying the desired results, including choosing the outcomes, an analysis of the indicators for each outcome, and identifying what students will know, what they understand, and what they will be able to do. Setting your instructional targets is a way of knowing what it is that our students are learning and how we will identify when they have learned it. It is the so-called meat and potatoes of effective instruction. Developing the big ideas can only be accomplished with a deep understanding of the outcomes and describes the heart of learning. Developing questions for deeper understanding becomes easier with practice and well worth the effort as they drive students to become lifelong learners through the inquiry process. I would like to thank Aaron Hiskey and Jeff Walters for their support in the creation of this webinar and ask that you forward any requests for further support to either myself at susan.saunders@cornerstonesd.ca or Aaron Hiskey at aaron.hiskey@cornerstonesd.ca. In addition, I would like to say a very special thank you to all of you who have attended this webinar. I thank you for your time and sincerely hope that you have found some pieces that will help to make unit planning more effective, simpler, and perhaps save you some time. Have a wonderful day and happy planning!